There are a lot of first level spells in D&D 5e, and we are still talking about them.
My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we continue tier ranking all the spells in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is part 3 of the first level spells. We're now in high spooky season, and this is the perfect time for a dark fantasy one-shot or a new campaign.
And if you're looking for the perfect dark fantasy adventure to set out into next, then look no further than this week's sponsor, Grimhollow.
It's the perfect time to pick up the core books, which are in a special bundle for the Halloween season. $99 gets you the original campaign guide, the player's guide, and the Monster Grimoire, some of which have some very talented dudes which have contributed to these books.
We did create a few of these subclasses in the player's guide for Grimhollow, but the Grimhollow setting in itself is an incredible dark fantasy setting filled with vampires and werewolves and amazing monsters and locations for you to explore.
The Monsters Grimoire has some of the finest dark fantasy monsters that you can drop into any campaign as well. So whether you're running just a horror one-shot and looking for great inspiration to put that together for Halloween night, or just a bunch of new monsters to add to your regular campaigns, the core book bundle is the perfect chance to pick up this awesome book.
So make sure to check the links below to get your hands on the core bundle today. And now, on to this week's episode. A quick reminder of how we rank our spells. Up on screen right now, you can see the criteria that we use to rank all of our spells. S tier are generally spells that everybody who has access to them or might even want to take a feat to get should. A tier are really, really great choices for the classes that have access to them. B tier are great in the right situation. C tier might be useful in niche situations, but could also be a waste of grabbing if they never come up in your game. And D tier you should probably just avoid.
With that, we're going to jump in with one of my favorite spells, Faerie Fire, which is available for bards, druids, artificers, and to some cleric domains, as well as archfey warlocks. This first level spell you cast on a small area. The targets in the area have to make dexterity saving throws, and if they fail their saves, they are illuminated with ethereal light for the duration, giving all your allies advantage on attack rolls against them.
One of my favorite features of this spell is that if the target is invisible or turns invisible while the spell is affecting them, they are still glowing with the sparkly Faerie Fire, so you can see them. And I think that makes this spell a little bit of a sneaky, awesome pick. It's really useful against targets that can turn invisible, or if you think you know where a group of invisible targets are, you can drop Faerie Fire and a bunch of them might show up and allow you to hit them. I will say that the only negative that I really have on this spell is that it is rightfully a concentration spell, but that also means that as you get to higher level play, is a first level concentration spell going to be your choice? Or might you want to pick a better higher end concentration spell? So I find that at low level play, Faerie Fire is one of my favorite spells in the entire game, and I almost always pick it. But I use it less and less as I get to mid and high tier play.
That said, I feel Faerie Fire still has its place at high levels. Not only at higher levels of play are you going to be encountering invisible enemies much more often and being able to negate their invisibility with a simple first level spell in an AoE that reveals them to yourself and your allies. Unlike spells like True Sight and See Invisibility, which only affect one person at a time, this is going to illuminate an invisible creature for your entire adventuring party and give everyone advantage on attack rolls. It's one of the easiest ways to get continual advantage on attack rolls for your entire group against multiple enemies. By comparison, Guiding Bolt, also a first level spell, is a one-shot attack that does a bit of damage and gives advantage on the next attack only. Whereas Faerie Fire, it works with allies who have multiple attacks. Fighters love getting set up for it with Action Surge because they're going to get advantage on every single attack. It really is kind of like the marker light or paint the target on the enemies. And because it's an AoE, it kind of gives it that counterbalance to the fact that they do get a saving throw to avoid it initially. And that's kind of the most disappointing part about Faerie Fire, is that if you're only using it on one monster and they succeed their save, you're kind of like, mm.
I do want to mention that rogues also love this spell
Yeah.
because you're just giving them free sneak attack no matter the situation. It isn't one that you're going to want to use on a single target, which can be rough if you're fighting an invisible dragon or something of that sort. But a group of enemies, it's going to be very useful against. I think that even though it loses steam at higher levels, it still is a relevant spell that you won't want to get rid of. You'll still want to have it packed even at higher levels for those moments that it becomes really, really useful. For that reason, I'm either at an A plus or an S minus.
I think it's an A plus, and here's ultimately why I feel it's an A plus. You either want to have Faerie Fire or Bless, which, generally speaking, you look at the classes, and the Bards and the Druids and the Artificers have Faerie Fire, and the Clerics and the Paladins have Bless. Faerie Fire and Bless together is an amazing combination, and when you have both together, that is a go-to high-level combination. Like, you can use that at high levels, and you will stomp the encounter that you go to, especially if you have competent melee or ranged combatants. I think that the fact that it does have a saving throw, which means that at higher levels, enemies with good dexterity saving throws, magic resistance, or legendary creatures, I do actually think that with a legendary monster, I would legendary resistance Faerie Fire. It's actually worth it to do so. And so that element does bring it down a little bit. It gets brought up by the fact that it is an AoE and that it has that utility of revealing enemies. And again, in comparison to Bless just always works because it's buffing your allies, and it's also giving them the advantage it's also giving them the bonus on saving throws. So I think Faerie Fire is a little less good than Bless, not by much, but enough to bump it down from the absolute S tier. I think case in point, if you're a light domain cleric who has both Faerie Fire and Bless, you probably are still going to cast Bless as your go-to.
One thing that I do think is interesting, I am agreeing with you that Faerie Fire is an A plus, not an S tier, but taking feats that have allowed me access to Faerie Fire, it's usually one of my go-to pickups. So I do think that it is one of the best first level spells to pick if you have access to it. And if you don't have anything to pick and you are taking a feat, then it might be useful.
Faerie Fire does outperform Bless for your concentration in those situations where you're getting multiple enemies that have bad dexterity saving throws, but that the advantage is going to be more important than the D4, because mathematically, advantage on a D20 roll is like getting a +5 bonus, whereas Bless is only a D4. So in terms of the accuracy benefit, Faerie Fire brings a bigger boost, assuming you don't already have a source of advantage. And that's where, again, Bless picks up its mileage from, because Bless will stack with advantage, whereas Faerie Fire is just providing it. So again, it's not a clear-cut decision, and there is an argument for saying that Faerie Fire deserves to be in the S tier. I hear you if you feel it. I'm kind of torn over it, but overall, I feel like Bless is much more of a fire and forget sort of thing, and Faerie Fire's saving throw is the thing that knocks it out of the S tier.
Next up, we come to False Life, which is available for sorcerers, wizards, artificers, some clerics, and some warlocks.
Skip it.
And let's discuss what it does. You use your action to gain 1d4 plus 4 temporary hit points. Yeah, I think it could be useful.
Yeah, it's just skip it.
Yeah, but like, it's not a trap.
It's not a well, okay. Let's talk about it. Okay, is it a trap?
Aren't there some classes that do get like false life?
Okay,
a bolster to their false life?
1d4 plus 4 damage is going to spare you from like one solid hit. You know what else is going to spare you from one solid hit from a goblin, but multiple goblins? Shield. Sorcerers and wizards both have access to shield.
You know what also is going to spare you from one solid hit from a goblin? Burning Hands.
Or absorb elements.
Or any damaging spell that kills multiple goblins.
You could only use the spell on yourself. False Life would be much more useful if you could cast it on someone else, I think, because then it would be a bit of an actual buff. But it just really doesn't offer a lot of value for the first level spell slot that you spend on it in terms of the defensive options. And in the direct comparison to shield, like what is going to spare you more damage? Shield as a single cast spell is a reaction, so it's there when you need it. Its AC buff will apply to multiple attacks. Shield at low levels of play can spare you from tons of damage, whereas it won't spare. Whereas False Life will just absorb one solid hit, and you had to cast it beforehand.
Yeah, it's a D.
Yeah, I just think I just can't see any situation. It's really cool when you have some way of casting False Life for free.
Yeah.
It's really cool also when there's even maybe a Necromancer Wizard might want to cast it to get the benefit of casting a Necromancy spell. But as a spell that you have to spend a spell slot on, and it's immediately superseded by so many of the other effects in the game that grant you temporary hit points, like Inspiring Leader or anything else. I just skip it.
Next up, we come to Featherfall, available for bards, sorcerers, wizards, and artificers. This spell allows you to cast it as a reaction if you are falling, and then you are falling softly like a feather.
More explicitly, you don't have to cast it on yourself, and you get to choose up to 5 people who are falling. So in a recent game of our own, Jill's character Veo cast Featherfall on a falling ally who was falling from a very, very tall tree to escape a dragon. Featherfall is one of those spells that every time it gets cast, it saves a character's life.
It's interesting because on one hand, it feels like a niche spell, because it's not often that you need to catch yourself or players falling from a tall building or tree, but when it happens, it's the most important spell in the whole game.
And especially when you are shooting a video with a player who almost every one of their characters who has died in your campaign died because falling was in some way, shape, or form involved in the situation, it really starts to feel like it's a much more useful spell at preventing death.
Okay, not to mention, let's talk about the other implications of this spell. Yeah, it saves people's lives, but also if you're like doing a heist in a castle and the MacGuffin is in the tallest tower, and how do we get out after we get the MacGuffin?
Yeah.
You jump out the window and cast Featherfall and fall to safety. Featherfall is a great escape tactic as well as a life-saving tool, which means that I think it's actually raised up. The niche situations become more apparent when you think of all the elevations that can happen in your D&D games and all the ways that being able to fall from nearly any height safely can actually benefit an entire party.
Indeed. It kind of makes you think of all the ways, if you played Deus Ex Human Revolution and used the Icarus landing system.
That was the most useful upgrade in the whole game.
Yeah, it came up a surprising amount. And there's so many times where like the party is like, well, we have to get past this cliff, or we have to go down the mountain afterwards, or we've just all got a bunch of flying mounts and we want parachutes. So I think that Featherfall is one of the spells that it rises in value once flight becomes something that is in your party. And it's also something that is, I think that the Veo tactic that we saw in our game of, it's very often that the wizard who has the fly spell is the one also with Featherfall. And it's worth pointing out that a lot of the time, if you're a wizard and you're flying, and something happens to your fly spell, like your concentration gets broken, or you're stunned or incapacitated or whatever, you're falling, and now you're in a situation where you can't take reactions to save yourself with Featherfall. So Featherfall is very valuable on like more than one character to really enhance its usefulness as an insurance spell. And it becomes more useful the more flight is happening in your party as just a way of preventing instant death. So I think that for myself, I would say Featherfall is soundly in the B tier because it becomes S tier in the right situation. And the right situation happens to be the more flying is in your party, the more S tier and must have Featherfall is, because the more likely it is that some sort of falling related disaster is going to kill you.
I agree with the B tier ranking. Some of my reasons that I want to throw in there is that not every DM uses elevation as much as we do. There's a lot of elevation in our games. There's a lot of different areas that we're playing on. There are a lot of cliffs, bridges, and all of that sort of stuff when we play D&D. So Featherfall becomes more apparent and an easy pickup in a campaign that uses a lot of elevation. But if you find that your DM has a lot of flat battlefields, which can happen in a lot of gaming tables, Featherfall might not be as useful of a pickup. I still think that B basically says, hey, it might be worth looking at, and in a lot of campaigns, it's going to have those situations where it saves lives.
Next up, we come to Find Familiar, the powerful spell available.
Take it.
Yeah, we did a whole video on Find Familiar.
If you want to see our video where we literally only talk about this spell, it's right up over there. And just take it.
Yeah, if you're a wizard, just take it. If you get the Ritual Caster feat, take it. Why? Okay, so the answer is why. Summoning a companion, aside from the amazing role-playing value of having your favorite pet that you can love and take care, that you can love and hold and take care of, and talk with and be your best friend because you're socially awkward and it's easier to form relationships and attachments with animals than it is to people.
That's why I take it.
Find Familiar has so much utility in the game because of the fact that you can command the familiar to deliver spells, touch spells for you. You can have the familiar be a scout, especially by having it turn into an innocuous creature. Because your familiar doesn't have to always be a cat. You can change your cat into a rat, or into a bat, or into a mouse, if you really want to go for the lulz, or into an owl or a raven. And it can fly around, it can scout locations for you, and it can also act on its own initiative in combat and perform the help action. And depending on how lenient your DM is, it might even be able to use magic items and administer potions. I am not such a DM. I do not allow familiars to administer magic items and potions or concentrate on spells. But some people do, and that makes it even better.
Not only can it do all of that, but you also have a telepathic link with your familiar, and you can go into your familiar and look through its eyes and hear through its ears. And so it works as a scout, but it actually works as you, the caster, being a scout through an animal. And in that way, you can gather information that maybe the animal companion would not normally be able to do, but because you can see and hear through it, that opens up a lot of gateways. If you're playing a Pact of the Chain Warlock, which is more niche, but it opens up even more options for the familiar, which allows you to do some really crazy stuff. So in almost every situation, the familiar helps in exploration, social in some regards, and combat. So it's an emotional support animal. It helps in social situations.
I
mean, some people are just like, "Oh, can I pet your cat?" And you're like, "Yeah, of course." And now you get a bonus to your persuasion advantage. So it's really a first level spell that helps you in every situation in the game.
Yeah.
And I mean, the ability to deliver touch spells is one of those like hidden little things that you don't realize how powerful it is until you realize how powerful it is.
Until you see someone actually do it in your game, you're like, oh yeah, that's a thing. I think that the other thing that makes Find Familiar such a powerful spell in general is that it is a ritual and it is quite easy to access. Warlocks can get Find Familiar through Pact of the Chain, but they can also get it through the Pact of the Tome because they can add ritual spells to their tome through all the invocations surrounding that. Anyone can take the Ritual Caster feat and get it. Eldritch Knights and Arcane Tricksters can get it because they have access to the Wizard spell list. Of course, Wizards have it. You took Ritual Caster on your Sorcerer to get it, and a bunch of other things. Because you get Find Familiar by taking the Ritual Caster feat, the Ritual Caster feat would be worth it alone just for Find Familiar. But then you get all the ritual spell casting associated with that. So it's very easy to pick up for anybody. It's a very powerful spell. It's S tier.
It's S tier. Next up, we come to Fog Cloud, available for druids, rangers, sorcerers, and wizards.
So Fog Cloud is what I would consider an underrated spell. Fog Cloud is basically darkness, except as a first level spell that foils Devil's Sight.
I do think that you need to be careful with your casting of Fog Cloud because it's not necessarily, in my opinion, used in combat to improve combat. It's either used in combat to create an escape route where you drop Fog Cloud on your enemies and get out of
It's
there.
like a smoke bomb.
Yeah. Or you can use it if you're trying to be stealthy and you're in a situation where the place that you need to get to, there's no way to get to it without the enemy spotting you, and you drop Fog Cloud and then try to run past them. Fog Cloud mixed with something like Pass Without Trace, I think, can be really useful.
Yeah.
There are tactics here. It's a tactical spell that I think does have a lot of implications. Anytime that you've seen a smoke bomb used in your favorite movies, this is smoke bomb the spell.
Yeah, it does run into some of those weird interactions because, technically speaking, if you can't see a target and your target can't see you, you have disadvantage on your attack roll because you can't see the target. But the target grants you advantage because they can't see you. Thus, the advantage and disadvantage negate each other. And so, in this respect, a bunch of people standing in a fog cloud are actually no worse at hitting each other than they would be otherwise. So I feel it's important to mention that this mechanical interaction kind of negates both sides of it. And so you do have to have a little bit of a stronger DM interpretation of saying, no, this is blocking line of sight. You can't see each other, therefore you can't target each other. And so that does run into those certain issues with certain spells that actually require you to have to see the target to be able to target them. And if you also apply that to, say, attack rolls and ranged attacks, it can make the spell a lot more powerful in that regard. Otherwise, the spell is kind of neutralized in many respects because the advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out. It's worth noting that if you do want to use it aggressively in a way that works, because the blind fighting style is something you can get with a feat, you can give yourself blind sight in the fog cloud, and now you've got the darkness devil's sight combo. But on a first level spell and a feat, it's like way more accessible in a weird way. And it's weird that the fog cloud blind fighting thing isn't more prevalent than darkness devil's sight, because I feel like it's easier to pull off and more accessible to more classes. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it technically is.
I feel like this spell is a B because it has a lot of useful implications, but you need to know how you want to use it.
I agree, and I think the DM interpretation is a factor too.
Yeah.
I do. It wouldn't necessarily be a go-to, but I think that it excels in certain situations, and it also excels depending on how your DM rolls the spell.
Next up, we come to Goodberry for Druids and Rangers. You can produce a bunch of berries that heal people for 1 hit point when they eat the berries, and you can give them the berries, and they eat the berries, and they make lovely jam, and they have jam sandwiches, and then they feel better.
And they're also sustained for a day. So this is the spell that single-handedly kills wilderness survival campaigns.
Yeah, anytime that I've tried to run a wilderness survival campaign and I'm like, you will have to fight for rations, you will have to scrounge for food, go hunting for your meat. And then somebody's like, okay, I'm going to play a druid and I have Goodberry. And then I just rip up my whole exploration notes and go, all right, never mind, you're good.
The healing element of the spell is also one of those underrated elements because it conjures 10 berries that restore 1 hit point each, which means that it always restores 10 hit points for the first level spell slot. So that can actually be a lot of healing if you just give all the berries to someone and they just go...
Are these berries okay? No, they're good.
But they can become great berries. I don't know if you noticed this, but if you are a life domain cleric, the bonus from being life domain applies to every berry of the Goodberry. And they actually caught this in Baldur's Gate 3 because if you are a life domain cleric that casts Goodberry in Baldur's Gate 3, you conjure great berries that have extra healing on them.
So it might be worth it as your druid to take 1 level of life domain cleric.
Yeah, it's so that you can make great berries, because then it becomes
Is it just 1 level?
Yeah.
Gets you there? Yeah, cool. Yeah. So then you make great berries.
Yeah, and they restore considerably more hit points for a single casting. I think it ends up being 4 hit points per berry, which is 40 hit points for a first level spell slot, which kind of good, kind of great.
Kind of great,
yeah.
So I still don't know if this is like the most amazing spell in the game. I think it's an A And my reasoning for A is that other than the case that we just said, where you're already probably playing a druid and then you picked up a level of life domain
Yeah.
cleric, if you were playing a life domain cleric, you might not want to pick up a level of druid to get it. You might not go out of your way for Goodberry.
You could, though, I will say with a cleric, taking Magic Initiate Druid to get Shillelagh and Goodberry is a pretty solid play.
So my theory is that for the classes that have access to Goodberry, you should take it. For the classes that don't, you're probably not, but I would allow you to argue against that. I'm giving it an A because that's where I stand.
I agree. I think it's a solid A. It is an excellent healing spell. It has some great utility. It is one of those spells that sort of deletes a certain obstacle entirely from the game, which is sustenance, which has both good and bad things. The fact that it is a spell that works this way means that Goodberry is a spell that gets banned sometimes. So
if I was running a exploration gritty survival campaign, I would ban Goodberry, but I would make sure all my players knew that well ahead of time, that the type of campaign we're playing doesn't allow Goodberry, because that single spell can ruin a concept of a campaign.
Next up, we come to Grease. It's available for Artificers and Wizards. When you cast Grease, it conjures a 10-foot square of slippery, greasy liquid that creatures have to make dexterity saving throws or fall prone, whether when the spell is first cast for the first time, or when they end their turn in the area or enter the area on a turn. Notable fact about Grease, lasts for 1 minute, no concentration required.
Now, depending on your DM interpretation, I am a pretty forgiving DM, and I like to make grease extra flammable. So I have my players exploit that a lot. But that isn't part of the spell. That's just the way that I picture grease, is it's like cooking grease. So you can set it ablaze, and we have a lot of fun with that.
I also have people use the grease spell to literally grease themselves up for when they need to enter into a tunnel or when they need to crawl through the vents, like if they want to be the grease Scotsman like Willie. And I usually do give advantage on like acrobatics checks when the spell is used in this way, but the traditional way of just using the spell to knock people prone, concentration free, is great.
As a DM, I have actually been surprisingly undone by the grease spell. My players have cast it in a narrow hallway, and all of my enemies failed their saving throws and fell right down, while the characters got either advantage on them or were able to escape. I have an artificer in my current game who has grease, and I've been surprised by how often they use it to great effect.
And the grease spell, because it doesn't have the concentration requirement but lasts for 1 minute, is a great follow-up spell for a powerful battlefield control effect of some kind. For example, this is especially potent if you have the interpretation that the grease spell does not get set on fire. You could use grease beside a wall of fire. And I mean, mentally, my image here is actually conjuring the wall of fire, making the grease spell at the top of stairs, and someone slips down the stairs and into the wall of fire, which would be an amazing situation if you get that set up. But just using grease on the opposite side of a wall of fire, so someone's trying to get through the wall of fire, but they slip in the grease, and now they're still getting cooked.
Yeah.
And if it is like cooking oil, then they're going to get nicely browned.
It is also like one of those spells that you, because it's concentration free, combining it with like a lot of, we did those videos on like spell combinations.
Yeah.
Really, anytime that you can set up an AoE that lasts and then drop grease in the middle of it. I'm thinking like Sickening Radiance, and you drop grease in the middle of it so that characters are slipping and falling while getting microwaved. There's actually a lot of useful implications, and I think grease is an underrated spell. A lot of people do talk about it, but I never feel like I hear about it a lot, and people being like, oh yeah, you should take grease. So I actually think this is an A-tier spell.
I agree with that. I think it combos well with a lot of the other kind of battlefield control kit, and I think that if you have a caster that is taking a bunch of the powerful concentration battlefield control spells at higher levels of play, combining grease with something like Tasha's Mind Whip and the telekinetic feat, you end up with someone that is really good at moving people around, keeping them in a certain area, stopping them from moving out of their areas, and then you add something like Thunderwave or Telekinetic or Eldritch Blast with Forceful Blast, and you have a really good kit that doesn't necessarily consume the high level spell slots. It's just using those first level spells. And it's a really good way to bring those lower level spell slots in support of a higher level spell that I think is part of a strategy that I don't see a lot of players use. I see a lot of players they'll go right to, oh, now that my wall of force or my fireball is down, or now that my wall of force or my hunger of Hadar is down, I'm just going to go right back to blasting instead of finding more ways to keep that advantage going. And it does that one thing where you want to stop the enemies from walking out of the battlefield control effect. And grease is really good because they might try to walk out, but now they're going to slip in the grease. They're going to fall prone. They lose half their movement to stand up. And that makes it much more costly for them to get out, which could be the difference of an enemy being affected by a spell for 1 turn versus 2 turns. And if you think of that in that way, like if an enemy is going to be affected by your battlefield control for 1 turn and you use a first level spell slot to make them affected by it for 2 turns, you just doubled the effectiveness of your higher level spell slot, and all it cost you was a first level slot.
Next up, we come to Guiding Bolt, which is available to all clerics, as well as Oath of Glory paladins, the Celestial Warlocks, and the Stars Druid as well. Guiding Bolt is a simple spell. You cast it as an action. You shoot a bolt of radiant energy at a target. It does 46 radiant damage, and the next attack against that creature has advantage. You can upcast this to do additional damage.
I used to love this spell. Then I played Baldur's Gate 3, and Shadowheart continually disappointed me with it. She always misses with this stuff. Every time I cast this with Shadowheart, she misses.
She does, but I don't think that's a reason to talk. Like, I don't know why Shadowheart can't cast Guiding Bolt, but she can't. And Shadowheart, get your stuff together here.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, just aim.
Like
you have
aim.
a good wisdom score. I maxed your wisdom out. You should be able to hit with this spell.
Like, come on. But Guiding Bolt is, for me, the really great go-to first-level damage spell for clerics.
Yeah.
It feels right. It feels good. And it is a nice... 46 is a nice amount of damage.
Well, I think that the problem that I've had with Guiding Bolt is oftentimes Guiding Bolt kills the target, and you don't want to kill the target with Guiding Bolt. You want them to be alive so you get the advantage on the follow-up attack.
At the same time, if I'm going for setting up the advantage on the next attack and oops, I killed the target instead, I'm still kind of happy because that's one less enemy on the battlefield.
Totally agreed. And at the end of the day, Guiding Bolt is kind of that great way for your cleric to dump some first-level spell slots into encounter when you're already concentrating on something like Spirit Guardians or Bless. You never want to cast Guiding Bolt before you got your important buff spell down. It isn't necessarily going to be the very first spell that you should throw in an encounter. That should be Bless or Spirit Guardians. You should get your spiritual weapon rolling. But if you are in the point where you're looking for other ways to contribute to the encounter, you want a good damage dealing spell that is based on an attack roll and not a saving throw, which does technically make it stronger because attack roll spells are not going to be subjected to things like legendary resistance and the fact that monster saving throws just get insanely high and they have magic resistance. So you can nail someone for a bunch of damage. I don't think I would ever upcast Guiding Bolt.
I have his Shadowheart, and it was bad.
Yeah, it'll just make you sad.
I do think this is an A-tier spell, which is to say that if you're a cleric, you should probably take it or deeply consider it. If you're another class, I don't know if you need to go out of your way to get it.
I think it's a B. And the reason why is simply put, I think it is like the 3rd to 5th spell that you're going to want to cast in a combat encounter. You're just going to get way more mileage out of something else for that first level slot. And you also run into the situation, I think, with the cleric is you could cast Guiding Bolt for your first level slot, but you also kind of do want to keep your first level slots open for things like Healing Word. You might want to bring something else to the table. So again, depending on how aggressive you want to play, it might be worth even just leaving those slots uncast to have a just in case thing.
I mean, agree to disagree. I think that before you have access to Spirit Guardians or Spiritual Weapon, this is actually one of the go-to spells. And when you do, it still is useful to keep in your arsenal. And for that reason, I think it's a valuable pickup.
See, I disagree. I think before you have access to these spells, you definitely don't want to cast Guiding Bolt, because you want to be you want to use your spell slots for something else.
Anytime I've played a cleric, as soon as the combat starts, if I'm have 2, 3 first level spells, I always kick things off by hitting a big target with Guiding Bolt, setting up my fighter or my rogue for advantage for a big sneak attack or a few attacks in. And it usually helps take out a big target on the battlefield quickly.
I agree that that's a good move. I just think that you have to assess, is that the best move you could make as the first move in combat versus Bless or something else. It always depends. And is that the most valuable use of your spell slots? So I don't think it's like a no-brainer necessarily, but it's a good spell.
Next up is Hail of Thorns, available for Rangers. This spell is a bonus action to cast, and it rains a Hail of Thorns down when you fire your bow at a target. The target still takes the regular damage of your attack, and then it and all of the targets within 5 feet of it have to make a dexterity saving throw or take 1d10 damage. I think that this spell is extremely thematic and really cool to imagine the arrow breaking apart into several arrows. But is it worth taking?
So this is one of those spells that makes me go, every time I look at it, because there's a bunch of elements of the spell that are really, really good. But then when you compare it to the go-to spell for Rangers, you go, oh yeah, but that's why I'm not going to take it. So Hail of Thorns is a bonus action to cast, and it's a concentration-based spell. But that means that it's very easy to combo with your attack. What happens is you're casting it as a bonus action, and the next time you hit with a ranged attack, the thorns kind of sprout out or fall down. So if you cast the spell and whiff your attack, the spell doesn't go away. That's why you're concentrating on it. And it's giving you straight up extra damage on top of your regular attack. And it's a D10, but the target and the targets around it get the dexterity saving throw, and they're still taking half damage on a successful save. So you're always going to get a little bit of extra damage out of this, even if the target makes their save. It's also worth noting that this spell can be upcast, adding a d10 each time. And so you start to look at the spell and go, hey, isn't this kind of like smiting with a ranger, except as an AoE? Because you are adding d10s onto the attack roll. Like if you use a 4th level slot for it, it's 4d10 extra damage on the target. Sure, they get a save, but they're still going to take half that damage, and it's still added to whatever your attack. And if there's anybody beside it, you're getting a little bit of splash damage out of it. And you're like, actually, yeah, that's starting to sound pretty good. But here's where the problems come in. It's a bonus action to cast, and it's concentration. There's another spell that Rangers really like that's also a bonus action to cast and requires concentration. And because of the saving throw, the damage always has a chance of being diminished from what it could have been. So there are several situations where the amount of where on a successful save, that D10, it gets really bumped down. So this is an interesting spell. I think it has a lot of potential. I think it's really stronger at lower levels of play. But I think for me, it's like a B at best.
I agree that it's a B at best, and it's just unfortunate that when I give it a B, I think that if it weren't for other spells that exist, it would be higher. But the fact is that there are other spells that exist that make it really, really hard to use this spell, because you're using it in place of some of the go-tos for Rangers. I think that it is, I don't want to give it any lower than a B, though, because I think it is a thematic and cool and useful and impactful spell. For everything that it says it's going to do, it does, and it does it pretty well. And I like that it does half damage even if they save. It means that no matter what, your casting is going to pay off to some regard. And it's great against a group of small enemies that are charging at you. Yeah, you have a group of goblins that are crowding around about to charge. You can take a lot of them out pretty easily.
Yeah, and that's where the situational elements of the spell come to their own. In a situation where maybe you want to upcast the spell, although you're really not getting a lot out of it if you do, compared to some other options. You can get a lot of damage now out of this spell, but the cost is going to be, you could have had another spell that you could be concentrating on that is going to give you more sustained damage over the course of the combat encounter. And I think about this spell in the context of, we talked about Divine Favor and Paladin Smiting. And this is another instance where, like, the context of the Paladin class makes Divine Favor not as great, and the context of the Ranger class makes this spell, like, middling. Because if this was one of the only spells that were available to Rangers, it would be a go-to. But there's other options that are available that are going to compete with this spell and really make you think, is this really the best use of my limited numbers of spells known that you also have as a Ranger? And I think that even though I would give it a B, I think that if I'm looking at all the other options, I'm still not taking it. So there's a part of me that goes, maybe it's a C, maybe it's even a D. It's not terrible, but there's just so many other spells that you should take with your Ranger before you take this spell. Healing Word is a fantastic spell. We've often talked about it as being slightly overrated, but it still is an awesome spell.
It's a first level spell available to bards, clerics, druids, and the alchemist artificer. You can target a creature at range as a bonus action and give them 1d4 plus your spellcasting modifier in hit points back. It can save a player character from the grips of death at ranged as a bonus action. I don't know what else to say about that. That's awesome.
Yeah, this is your go-to save someone's life and bring them back into the battle spell. Because it is ranged and is only a first level spell slot and is only a bonus action, it really has a lot of advantages over Cure Wounds, even though it doesn't heal quite as many hit points. It's really only the difference of a D4 versus a D8, which is only 2 points of healing on average. Maybe that'll make a difference, but very rarely will it if that target is getting attacked again. And you can just Healing Word them back up like a yo-yo. People have complained about that element of the spell a lot, in that a character, depending on the initiative order, a character can get downed, the cleric Healing Words them, they get downed, Healing Word, and they're still attacking and still fighting despite the fact that they're constantly being knocked unconscious and probably ending up with a lot of trauma in that situation, but they're still fighting effectively. So hey, Healing Word in that respect is an S tier spell. If you can take the spell, you should take it. I don't think I have seen a cleric, bard, or druid that hasn't prepared or chosen this as one of their spells known, because it is such a no-brainer. I have played many bards who knew Healing Word as a spell and very rarely used it, but it is kind of the spell that you want to very rarely have to use, but you really want to have it there for when you need it.
At my table, there is a cleric who has Healing Word, and although healing is not something that happens very often at our table, the wizard at my table is also notorious for poking things he shouldn't poke and dying relatively quickly in almost every combat encounter. When I say dying, I mean laying on the ground at 0 hit points, making death saving throws. And so the cleric has always packed Healing Word just to be like, oh my god, wizard, like, stop poking things and get them back so that they can run to the back lines and start doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we call it the wizard saving spell at my table, and the cleric will never stop taking it because it just keeps saving the squishy wizard. And I think that that's valuable. I think that it's really, really valuable to know that when you have somebody in your party who has Healing Word, the other players at the table feel like they can go and poke the brushy shambles that are shaking because I wonder what's in there. And they can be a little more reckless with their play style, not in a bad way, but more in a let's have fun, because we know that there's somebody here that if we get reduced to 0 has a way to get us back in the fight. And I find that having that person in the party just frees people up to be a little less scared of engaging with the game.
Indeed. On the flip side, as a game master, the strength of Healing Word does vary depending on how merciful you are. A situation that comes up a lot with Healing Word is the party member is heal back up with Healing Word, and now they've got 5 hit points. So a monster with multi-attack comes up to that player character, hits them, knocks them down to 0. But that monster has 2 more attacks remaining. And this is the thing that determines, are you a nice, merciful DM, or are you a ruthless monster? Because if you're a ruthless monster, you've got 2 multi-attacks that you can now bam, bam, and that character is dead because they got crit twice and they failed. That's 4 automatically failed death saves. And so I like to remind Dungeon Masters that you can do this.
I like to be the in-between DM and use a monster that has 2 attacks. And so the first attack knocks them down, and the second attack gives them 2 failed death saving throws, which makes an oh crap moment at the table where the players need to do something because there's a 50% chance that that player is going to die on their next turn, which feels good. And usually it brings in a response. And honestly, usually that response is another Healing Word, but then you just do it again. And it does make that emergency at the table. So Healing Word is overrated in the sense that there are actually pretty easy ways to deal with it because it's not a whole lot of hit points. But I still think it's an S tier spell because it's very, very helpful, very, very useful, and can just be that little bit of a safety net for reckless players.
Yeah, you just don't want to let players feel like they're too safe because of it. And doing the thing where the I'm also a DM that I often, if I have a monster with multi-attack, I target and declare the attacks all simultaneously and roll all the attacks together. So it happens more often in my games because, yes, this vicious predator of an animal doesn't really have a concept of moving along to the next person, and they're the type of monster that will just tear into somebody and rip their body apart. So your mileage may vary. As DMs, it is something that some players are like, that's unfair, that's not cool. But the flip side of it is that Healing Word is like super strong and the characters never die. So it's S tier, but worth the conversation.
Next up, we come to Hellish Rebuke, available for Warlocks and Oathbreaker Paladins. This first level spell is a reaction to cast triggered by when you get damaged. You can target the creature that damaged you, cause them to make a dexterity saving throw, and they take 2d10 fire damage, or half as much on a successful save. You can upcast it, doing more damage.
Hellish Rebuke is the Warlock reaction spell, and as a game master, I love putting Hellish Rebuke on my NPCs because it's a great way for the players to get backlash damage. But as a player, it's an expensive prospect. It's a spell slot to use. It is out of turn damage, but I really don't see it taken and used that often.
The problem with it, so I think that it's a very thematic and wonderful spell. And if I was a warlock that had full spell casting capabilities and like 5 first level spell slots at higher levels, then I would use this the way that my sorcerer uses shield. Every time I got hit, I would just be like, you take damage, you take damage. But that's not the case. As a warlock, you have 1, 2, 3 spell slots. Are you really going to use one of them for a reaction spell for 2d10 damage? I think that warlocks, all of their spells should either be emergency situations or great lasting concentration AoEs. You shouldn't be relying on a reaction spell to be your bread and butter damage dealing with a warlock. It's a waste of a spell slot, unfortunately. Oathbreaker Paladin actually might be the better place to take this spell.
Yeah.
It's a little more useful because you have more spell slots.
Yeah, it'd be really cool if there was an invocation that let you use this more often.
Like you could use it a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus at will.
Yeah.
Then it would be a really cool feature, and we should make an invocation that does that.
I think it's a C.
I think it's a C as well, and it's really unfortunate because technically I love this spell. It's just because of the way Warlock spellcasting works that it's not worth it.
Can I give one instance where it might be?
Go
Because
ahead.
I've seen this happen. Hellish Rebuke applies whenever you take damage, and it has a range of 60 feet. And it damages whoever damaged you. So, let's just say, for the sake of argument, you are standing on a battlefield, and you end up beside a cleric who casts Spirit Guardians on you. And you take damage from the Spirit Guardians, and you Hellish Rebuke that cleric. That cleric takes damage, and now has to make a concentration saving throw versus the damage from Hellish Rebuke, or their Spirit Guardians goes down. So in a very niche situation, when you take damage from a concentration spell, you can use Hellish Rebuke to force the concentration check to potentially end the spell. And in that case, it's kind of like a weird counterspell. It's not nearly as good as counterspell, but I've seen it happen more than once. So
that might be why it's not a D and it's a C.
Yeah.
I also think its flavor and the fact that you can take it as an Oathbreaker raises it a little bit. It's not a bad spell. It's just bad if you only have 2 spell slots.
Our next first level spell is Heroism. It's available for bards, paladins, and several cleric domains, as well as the Battlesmith Artificer. Heroism is a concentration-based spell. You target it on another creature, and for the duration of the spell, that creature can't be frightened. And at the start of each of its turns, they gain temporary hit points equal to your spellcasting ability modifier. This is not a bad little buff.
Okay, in a weird way, every time I read Heroism, I think, oh, that's a very useful spell. And then I never take it, and I've never cast it on a single character, and I've never seen anybody cast it. So it's one of those weird spells that falls for me in the middle ground. You read it, you go, not bad. But I just feel like there's always other choices that supersede taking this one that I can't really rank it. It's definitely not an A or S for me. Might be a B. But even as a B, I've never seen anybody use Heroism to great effect. I've never really seen anybody use Heroism other than a potion of Heroism, which is something that I award my players. That's what I think.
But a potion of Heroism is funny because a potion of Heroism gives you the effect of the Bless spell, not the Heroism spell.
Right, so it's not even the same. But yeah, I don't know. I think this is a B or a C. Probably, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say it's a B because it is a good spell. It's a B that I've never seen anybody use.
Okay, immune to being frightened is strong. In a circumstance where you have an enemy that is regularly using fear effects.
Yes.
So in this respect, it can be a silver bullet spell to shut down an enemy's powerful ability, especially when you cast it on the barbarian or the fighter who has a bad wisdom saving throw and needs to be attacking the dragon. Second point, because the temporary hit points are coming back every single round, the spell gets better the longer the spell is in effect. Because if you're giving, say, you got an 18 charisma, it's 4 temporary hit points. After 5 turns, that was 20 temporary hit points, assuming the target was taking damage every turn. So it's potentially a lot of damage absorbed the longer the combat goes. Generally speaking, though, as player characters, you don't want combat to go that long. You want it to be over quickly. And if the combat, so that is kind of, I think using this as a silver bullet to get around someone being frightened is cool and niche, but going into it for, hey, temporary hit points, so I'm preventing less damage, I just think, again, your mileage may vary on that.
I'm comfortable giving this a B. I think that there's probably going to be people in our comments saying, oh yeah, I use Heroism, it's great. And that's awesome, and that's why I think it deserves the B. Just in my playing experience, it comes up so little, but I still, I never read it and go, ugh. I read it and go,
It's one of those ones that, because again, there's other options that bards and paladins are also characters that are very likely to take Inspiring Leader, which is a lot more temporary hit points to the entire party.
But it is only once, where this keeps replenishing. But
on one character, yeah, right. So I ultimately think that for both bards and paladins, like I don't know why as a paladin, especially because paladins get their own built-in immunity to fear. I think as a paladin, why you would choose this over smiting or casting bless, I don't know. And as a bard, I just think that there's so many other things that you're going to want to concentrate on, even at low levels, that I just don't see where you're using this. I think it's a C at best.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to stick with B because I want the people out there to prove me right and tell me in the comments why Heroism is a B. I'm taking a chance on this one.
I just, again, for me, it's you cannot consider a spell in a vacuum. You have to consider a spell in the constellation of all the other spells that are available to those characters and all the other things that they could be doing.
It's probably a C. I'm just being hopeful.
Yeah. All right. Bring out some more of the big dogs. We got Hex.
Hex is a first level spell available for warlocks. This spell, you choose a target as a bonus action. You choose one of their ability scores that they now have disadvantage on ability checks.
But not saving throws.
Not saving throws. That's important.
Yeah.
But then all of your attacks against that target do 1d6 extra damage. Pairs really well with warlocks because as you gain levels, your Eldritch Blast fires more beams, each of them doing 1d6 more damage. This is kind of the bread and butter combo of the warlock. If you've played a warlock, if you've seen memes about warlocks, if you've heard somebody mention the word warlock, you probably know about the Hex Eldritch Blast combo. The one thing I will say is that, like Faerie Fire, which we talked about earlier in this episode, Hex actually becomes harder to use when you get to higher levels, but still relevant. I will never get rid of Hex.
Yeah.
But the question becomes more and more, is Hex the concentration spell I want out? And as you get to higher and higher levels, it loses the automatic yes to that question and becomes the maybe. Mm-hmm. I still do think, though, that it is an absolute must-have for warlocks.
Hex is very efficient as well, because if the target of your Hex dies, you can spend a bonus action to move it to a new target, and with a duration of an hour, that duration also increases as you use it with higher level spell slots. So this means that as your warlock, you can kind of cast Hex once and get a lot out of it and use it on a lot of enemies over the course of multiple encounters over the course of an entire day, even if you're not getting a lot of short rests. So it's very efficient in that regard. And yeah, you just can't argue with results. It generates good results. But there can be circumstances where Hex on one target is not going to be necessarily what you want to do. You really want to drop Hunger of Hadar and knock enemies into it with Forceful Blast. You really want to use, say, Synaptic Static and then follow it up with Hex. Hex is an enchantment spell, which means that characters can get access to Hex through the Fey Touched feat. So I think that it is a very strong spell. Is it an S tier spell?
For me, I think it is S tier, and it is that point that you did state about the longevity of the spell. What actually opened my eyes to how this spell is still useful at late game play was Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
Because I cast Hex on my first combat encounter at relatively high levels and maintained concentration on it through an entire dungeon.
Yeah.
Because when you're casting with the higher level spell slots, the duration increases. And as long as that warlock doesn't lose concentration on the spell, they're getting plus 1d6 to all of their targets as long as they're being methodical about it. They select the target, they blast, blast, blast until it dies, move it to the next one, blast, blast, blast until it dies. And you just keep doing that in every combat encounter, and you're actually doing really good damage as a warlock.
Now, on the flip side, one of the things that I found with it is that I was playing a Sorlock in Baldur's Gate 3, and there was a lot of times where I could have cast Hex, or I could have quickened a spell and cast Eldritch Blast again. And so sometimes you do run into those situations where things are competing for your bonus action, and you might be able to get more burst damage by not casting Hex again and doing something else with your bonus action. This becomes more of a factor if you're multi-classing with the Warlock, and it becomes less of a no-brainer. But you're already at the high end of power, and Hex is still factoring into whatever the build is. I do think that there's an argument that Hex is only an A, and that you might not necessarily want to go out of your way for it. I also think that there's a very strong argument that Hex is dependent on Eldritch Blast.
That's fair, and in that regard, S tier implies that any class should go out of their way to get it, but Hex...
But a Hex Blade can make good use of Hex. It's anytime you hit it with an attack, not when you hit it with a spell attack or a weapon attack or with Eldritch Blast. It's anytime you hit with an attack.
I do still think that Warlocks want this spell, but everybody else might not need it. I could see lowering it to an A. I'm going to stick with S.
I'm going to stick with S too because I love it.
But I could see the argument for A.
I also think the utility of the debuffing the ability check is seriously underrated and often flies under the radar. But until you see all the spells that actually require ability checks to escape from. Many illusion spells require an intelligence investigation check to escape from. There are many spells that require a strength ability check, not a strength saving throw, to break out of. And so you can debuff an enemy's ability to escape from these effects by using Hex. Very worthwhile to bear in mind in those sort of situations.
Finishing off today's episode, we are looking at the one and only Hunter's Mark, available for Rangers and Oath of Vengeance Paladins.
Hunter's Mark is the natural twin of Hex, so a lot of the same principles apply. Bonus action to cast, d6 extra damage, lasts longer depending on the level of the spell slot you're using to cast it with. It is worth noting that Hunter's Mark is not hit with an attack. It is hit with a weapon attack. So in some respects, it's a little weaker. You also get the advantage on your ability to track the target of your Hunter's Mark. You can kind of follow it longer afterwards, but I feel like if you're in a situation where your Hunter's marked someone, you really wanted them to be dead.
I do think that Hunter's Mark has a lot of the same benefits as Hex, and so I don't think we need to give a big speech on how all of those work. We just did with Hex, but I do think that it falls mildly weaker than Hex. I actually find that more likely, again, like Hex at early levels, go-to spell, you should absolutely take it. As you get to higher levels, unlike Hex, which becomes a maybe it's the right choice, maybe there's another concentration spell, I think Hunter's Mark actually does fall off, and you want to focus on other concentration spells and other features.
And I think this is actually why Hex is the S tier and Hunter's Mark for me is the A.
Yes.
Because I think that if you don't have access to the spell already, you're probably going to want to grab Hex instead of Hunter's Mark, because I think that Hex's secondary effect and the fact that it works on any attack, not just weapon attacks, kind of gives it the edge.
But I do think that Hunter's Mark is an absolute pickup for Rangers.
Yeah.
And if you're an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, it can be really fun as well.
Yeah. And I want to kind of close that up by saying that, like, Hex, Hunter's Mark, and Divine Favor are all, like, the Warlock, the Paladin, the Ranger. This is all their choose a target or get extra damage on your attack spells. And it's very interesting to see how they all stacked up. Because Hex is amazing. Divine Favor, much less so. I think Divine Favor suffers from the fact that it's only a D4 by comparison to the D6 of the others, which is only 1 damage, but that adds up because it's applying to every single attack. And you see how with things like Hex and Eldritch Blast, that D6 across the multiple blasts is really adding up.
I will also say that the same problem applies with the Oath of Vengeance Paladin with Hunter's Mark, where I took it on my Oath of Vengeance Paladin that I played for the entire campaign, and I still would just use my spell slot to smite most of the time rather than cast Hunter's Mark.
Yeah, so it was kind of, you do have to weigh that decision with there, and especially if you're playing something like a Hexblade where you might have the Eldritch Smite, you're always going to have to weigh these spells. I think it comes back to that point we made earlier about the Sorelock, is that do you want the sustained damage over the course of the battle? And do you want to have the element that this spell lasts a really long time? You know, that's kind of the other knock against Divine Favor. It only lasts for 1 minute, whereas Hex and Hunter's Mark, they get the increased duration. They last for an hour as a baseline. And so you can take those through multiple encounters, where you can't take Divine Favor through multiple encounters. And so ultimately for me, I think that there must-have spells within their classes, but I think that Hex is the best.
Hex is the best, Hunter's Mark is pretty good, and Divine Favor is not worth it.
Yeah, Divine Favor is the one that you just want to skip.
So all of that to say, I'm giving Hunter's Mark an A.
Yeah, me too.
And that wraps up this section of first level spells for us. I think that there were a lot of actually really good spells in this episode. In comparison, we gave out a lot of A's and a lot of S's.
Yeah.
And I think we got to see some of the best first level pickups available for their respective classes.
Yeah, the H's.
Good job, H.
Yeah, H. Letter of the day. Healing word.
Today's episode is brought to you by the letter H.
Should H be like our new S tier?
No.
No.
If you've enjoyed any of these spells or you want to yell at us for the rankings we gave, let us know in the comments below.
The videos on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do, please consider becoming a patron of our show, where you can talk to us about our rankings on our patron-only Discord server. The links are down in the description below.
And if you want to see us using a bunch of these spells in an actual play campaign, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And hey, we got tons more ranking videos that you can check out if you're doing the YouTube binge, all over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.